Case Closed Chronicles.
He lived in a quiet suburb of Sacramento. He mowed his lawn, he drove to the grocery store, he bounced grandchildren on his knee. For 40 years, Joseph James DeAngelo was invisible, but between 1974 and 1986, he terrorized the entire state of California. He broke into homes in the dead of night. He raped at least 50 women. He murdered 13 people. And then he simply stopped and disappeared into ordinary life. He almost got away with it forever. Until a genealogist sitting at a computer tracing a stranger's family tree changed everything. This is the story of the Golden State Killer and the most groundbreaking criminal investigation of the 21st century. To understand how DeAngelo was caught, you first have to understand what made him so terrifying and so impossible to find. His crimes began in the early 1970s in Visalia, California, a quiet agricultural city in the San Joaquin Valley. A series of home break-ins swept the neighborhood. Valuables were stolen, but the thefts were strange. Personal items taken, family photos disturbed, women's underwear moved. Whoever was doing this wasn't just stealing, he was watching, learning, getting comfortable. Police called him the Visalia Ransacker. Then in September 1975, things turned deadly. A local professor named Claude Snelling confronted an intruder attempting to abduct his daughter from their home. The intruder shot and killed him on the spot, then fled. The Visalia Ransacker had just become a murderer, but he was also about to disappear. Because in 1976, the same man, now working as a police officer in Auburn, California, moved his hunting ground north to Sacramento. There he became someone new, someone worse, the East Area Rapist. Between 1976 and 1979, the East Area Rapist launched at least 51 attacks across the Sacramento area. His method was meticulous and it was terrifying. He would select his victims weeks in advance. He stalked them. He studied their routines. In some cases, investigators later discovered he had broken into homes beforehand, leaving lengths of rope under beds and unlocking windows, preparing for his return. When he struck, he wore a mask and moved in near silence. He would tie up male partners and force women to tie up their children. He took trophies from every scene, a wedding ring, a single earring, a photograph. Items that meant nothing to a thief, but everything to a man who wanted control. He was described by survivors as calm, methodical, almost robotic. Then in 1979, the attacks in Sacramento stopped, and in Southern California, the murders began. Now calling himself the original Night Stalker, he shifted to targeting couples. Between 1979 and 1986, he killed 10 people across Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Orange counties. Each scene was more brutal than the last, and then in 1986, after the murder of a young woman named Janelle Cruz in Irvine, California, he vanished. For 32 years, there was nothing. Law enforcement never stopped looking. Over the decades, investigators linked the crimes together through DNA. The East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, and the Visalia Ransacker were all the same man. In 2001, DNA connected the Sacramento rapes to the Southern California murders. By 2013, DNA had tied him to even more crimes. In 2016, the FBI launched a renewed nationwide push, releasing new composite sketches and offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. Thousands of tips poured in. Every one of them led nowhere. But in December 2017, a detective named Paul Holes tried something that had never been done before in a criminal case of this scale. He took the killer's DNA, preserved from crime scenes dating back decades, and uploaded it to a public genealogy website called GEDmatch. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Instead of looking for the killer directly, they would look for his family. If anyone related to this man had ever submitted their DNA to a public ancestry database, there would be a partial match, not a direct hit, but a thread they could follow. A team of 5 investigators, led by forensic genealogist Barbara Ray Venter, got to work building a family tree. Working backwards from distant relatives, some connected to the killer as far back as his great-great-great-great-grandparents, they slowly, painstakingly narrowed the search. After months of work, they had 2 suspects. One was ruled out by a relative's DNA test. That left one name: Joseph James DeAngelo, age 72, a retired police officer living in Citrus Heights, California, 15 miles from where some of his earliest victims had lived. Investigators needed to confirm it without tipping him off. They placed DeAngelo under covert surveillance. They watched him move through his ordinary days, unaware apparently that the net was finally closing. Then on April 18, 2018, law enforcement descended on DeAngelo's home in Citrus Heights. There is one detail from his arrest that has stayed with investigators ever since. After DeAngelo was brought in for questioning, detectives placed a can of Dr. Pepper in front of him, the same drink he had left behind at several crime scenes decades earlier. A small, almost theatrical test. He didn't touch it. He sat completely still, staring straight ahead, saying nothing, as if he already knew the game was over. Later, alone in an interview room, not knowing he was being recorded, Joseph DeAngelo spoke quietly to himself. He said, "I did all those things. I destroyed all those lives." On June 29, 2020, Joseph James DeAngelo stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and 13 counts of kidnapping. He also admitted to dozens of additional rapes and crimes that fell outside the statute of limitations. In August of that year, survivors and the families of his victims were given the opportunity to face him in court. One by one, they stood up. They told him what he had taken from them, what they had carried for decades, how they had lived their entire adult lives in the shadow of what he had done to them in a single night. DeAngelo sat in a wheelchair, mask on, face blank. For 3 days, he absorbed it in silence. On the final day of sentencing, he rose from the wheelchair and spoke for the first and only time. He said, "I've listened to all your statements, each one of them, and I am truly sorry to everyone I have hurt." Judge Michael Bowman sentenced him to 11 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Joseph James DeAngelo will die in prison. The Golden State Killer case changed law enforcement forever. Since DeAngelo's arrest, the technique of investigative genetic genealogy has been used to solve more than 300 cold cases across the United States. Murderers, rapists, and predators who thought they had escaped justice decades ago are being identified, one DNA upload at a time. The detective who first uploaded the killer's DNA to GED Match, Paul Holes, later said this: "No matter how long ago the crime was committed, no matter how cold the case seems, the DNA never lies. And now neither does the family tree." If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Cold Case Chroniclez. Next week, we go to the woods of New Hampshire, where 4 bodies were found in a barrel, and for 30 years, not one of them had a name. That case is coming up next.